The pavement outside the 7-Eleven on Chestnut Street does not smell like rain. It smells like wet cardboard, diesel fumes, and the sour, metallic odor of despair. I sat on a flattened box that used to hold cartons of cigarettes, my knees pulled up to my chest in a futile attempt to trap my own body heat. The wind whipped around the corner of the building, cutting through the thin wool of my overcoat like a razor blade. It was a good coat once. It was a cashmere blend I bought at a boutique in Rittenhouse Square 3 years ago. Now it was sodden, heavy with freezing rain, and stained with the grime of the city that had swallowed me whole. I am William Vance. I am 76 years old. 48 hours ago, I was a man of substance. I was a grandfather who sat in a leather armchair in a paid-off brownstone, winding a Patek Philippe watch that was worth more than the car parked at the curb. I was a man who commanded respect. I was a man who existed. Now, I am a ghost. I looked at my hands. They were gray, the knuckles swollen and raw from the cold. In my right hand, I clutched a single crumpled dollar bill. It was damp. It was limp. It was the only thing standing between me and absolute zero. My stomach cramped, a hollow, twisting pain that I hadn't felt since I was a boy growing up in the tenements. I hadn't eaten in 2 days. Not since the bagel I had for breakfast on Tuesday morning, the morning my life ended. The memory of it hit me harder than the wind. It played on a loop in my mind, a jagged, skipping film reel of trauma that I couldn't turn off. It had started with a lie. My son, Richard, and his wife, Brenda, had come over early. They were smiling. That should have been my first warning. Richard never smiled before noon. "Dad, we made an appointment for you," Richard had said, checking his watch, a watch I had bought him. "Just a routine checkup. Dr. Evans wants to update your file." I didn't want to go. I felt fine. But Brenda had insisted, her voice taking on that shrill, patronizing tone she reserved for waiters and the elderly. "It's for the insurance, William. Don't be difficult." So I got in the car. I sat in the back seat of the BMW I had helped them with the down payment for. I trusted them. They were my blood. They were the people who were supposed to carry my casket, not put me in it while I was still breathing. When we got to the clinic, they didn't wait. Richard dropped me at the door. "I'll park the car, Dad," he said. "Go check in." I walked in. I sat in the waiting room for 2 hours. Dr. Evans finally saw me. He was nervous. He wouldn't look me in the eye. He asked me strange questions. Did I know the date? Did I know who the president was? Did I ever feel angry? I answered him. I was lucid. I was sharp. But while I was answering questions, Richard wasn't parking the car. He wasn't in the lobby reading a magazine. He was at the courthouse. He was standing before a judge with a file thick with falsified medical records, records he had bribed Dr. Evans to create over the last 6 months. He was filing an emergency competency order. He was telling a judge that his father was a danger to himself. He was telling a judge that William Vance had dementia, that he was violent, that he was squandering the family estate. He was stripping me of my rights with a signature. When I finally walked out of the clinic, confused by the doctor's evasiveness, Richard was waiting at the curb. He didn't unlock the doors. He rolled down the window an inch. "We're going home, Dad," he said. But the ride was silent. The air in the car was heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on my arm stand up. When we pulled up to the brownstone, my home for 40 years, the house where I raised him, the house where his mother died in my arms, I reached for my keys. I walked up the steps. I put the key in the lock. It didn't turn. I frowned. I jiggled it. I tried again. Nothing. It was the wrong key, or rather, it was the right key for a lock that no longer existed. The door opened from the inside. Richard stood there. He was still wearing his suit, but his face, it wasn't the face of the boy I taught to play catch. It wasn't the face of the man I had bailed out of debt 3 times. It was the face of a stranger wearing my son's skin. It was a mask of cold, indifferent calculation. "What is this?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Why doesn't my key work?" "You don't live here anymore, William," Brenda said from behind him. She didn't call me Dad. She called me William. "You're confused, Dad," Richard said. His voice was calm, terrifyingly steady. He held up a piece of paper. It had a court seal on it. "We're putting you in a facility tomorrow, a nice one. The state agrees. You're a ward of the court now, and I am your guardian." Guardian. The word sounded like a prison sentence. "Let me in, Richard," I said, stepping forward. "This is my house." He put a hand on my chest and shoved. It wasn't a hard shove, but the shock of it knocked the wind out of me. My son, putting his hands on me. "Tonight, you can cool off," Richard said. "You've been erratic, violent. This proves it." Violent? I had never raised a hand to anyone in my life. He slammed the door. I heard the deadbolt slide home. I heard the chain rattle. I pounded on the wood. I screamed his name. I screamed for Brenda. I screamed until my throat was raw. Then my phone buzzed. A text from the bank. "Alert. Account frozen. Legal hold applied." They had taken everything. In the span of 4 hours, they had taken my home, my money, my dignity, and my freedom. They had erased William Vance and replaced him with a case number. I wandered for 2 days. I was too proud to beg. I was too shocked to scream. I slept in a park the first night, curled up under a bench, terrified that if I closed my eyes, I would die. The second day, I just walked. I walked until my expensive Italian loafers blistered my feet. I walked until the hunger became a dull, throbbing ache that radiated from my center. And now, I was here, outside a 7-Eleven, freezing, dying. I looked up from the pavement. A man was standing a few feet away. I knew him, not by name, but by sight. He was a fixture of this neighborhood, a part of the scenery I used to walk past on my way to dinner without giving a second glance. He was a homeless veteran. He wore a jacket that was more grease than fabric. His beard was a tangled mess of gray wire. His eyes were milky with cataracts and sorrow. He was shivering. His tremors were violent, his teeth chattering with a sound like dice in a cup. He wasn't asking for money. He wasn't holding a cup. He was just standing near the vent of the store, trying to catch a whisper of heat escaping from the paradise of fluorescent lights inside. I looked at him. Then I looked at the dollar in my hand. That dollar was my lifeline. It could buy me a cup of black coffee. It could buy me 10 minutes of warmth inside the store. It could buy me a momentary reprieve from the death creeping into my fingers. But I looked at the man. Elias, I think I had heard someone call him once, and I saw myself. We were the same. We were both men who had been discarded. We were both men who had served our time, done our duty, and been left to rot on the curb. The only difference was that he had been here longer. He knew the rules of the gutter. I was a tourist in hell. I stood up. My knees popped loud enough to be heard over the wind. I walked over to him. "Elias," I said. He flinched. He looked at me, squinting through the gloom. He saw the coat that used to be expensive. He saw the scuffed leather of my shoes. He saw the ghost of the man I used to be. He didn't speak. He just shivered. "Get some hot," I said. I reached out and pressed the crumpled dollar bill into his hand. His skin was rough like sandpaper, but his palm was warm. He looked at the money. Then he looked at me. His eyes widened. He saw the Rolex I had managed to keep hidden up my sleeve, the one asset Richard hadn't been able to rip off my wrist because I had run. He saw the desperation in my eyes. He realized I wasn't giving him spare change. I was giving him my last drop of blood. "I don't need coffee, brother," he croaked. His voice was like gravel grinding together. "Take it," I insisted. He shook his head. He reached into the deep, filthy pocket of his jacket. He pulled out a piece of paper. It was small, rectangular, and stained with coffee. "I need luck," Elias whispered, "but I got too much bad luck on me. It won't stick. But you gave me yours, so you take mine." He pressed the paper into my hand. It was a lottery ticket, a scratch-off. "Found it on the ground," he murmured, looking around as if sharing a state secret. "By the subway. Checked the numbers in the paper yesterday. Someone dropped it. I think it's good. I think it's real good." I looked at the ticket. It was garbage. It was trash someone had tossed. "Why didn't you cash it?" I asked. Elias smiled. It was a toothless, genuine smile that broke my heart. "I got no ID," he said. "They won't pay a ghost. You need a name to claim a prize. I don't have a name anymore. You take it. You got a coat. You look like you still got a name." I stood there, the freezing rain matting my hair to my skull, holding a dirty piece of paper that a homeless man had traded for my last dollar. I stared at him. I stared at the man who had just thrown me a lifeline when my own flesh and blood, the boy I had raised and protected and loved, had handed me an eviction notice and a death sentence. It was a moment that broke something inside me. The grief that had been strangling me for 48 hours cracked open, and something else began to bleed through. It wasn't hope. It was clarity. I wondered, standing there in the ruin of my life, what the price of a soul actually was. Richard had sold his for the deed to a brownstone and a portfolio of stocks. Elias had kept his for the price of a cup of coffee. If you have ever been kicked when you were down, if you have ever felt the boot of the world on your neck and wondered why the people who claim to love you are the ones pressing down the hardest, then you need to listen to what happened next. If you believe that karma has a way of balancing the scales, even when the justice system fails, take a moment to subscribe, because I am about to show you that sometimes the people with nothing have the most to give, and the people who have everything are the poorest souls on earth. "You take it," Elias repeated. "Go on, get inside." He turned and walked away into the shadows of the alley before I could argue, disappearing into the night like he had never existed. I was alone again. I looked at the ticket, Pennsylvania Millionaire. I turned and walked toward the 7-Eleven. I didn't go in for the coffee. I didn't go in for the warmth. I went in because I owed it to Elias to check the trash. The bell on the door jingled. The clerk, a bored teenager with headphones around his neck, didn't even look up from his phone. I walked to the back, past the rows of brightly colored snacks that made my stomach scream. I found the self-scanner on the counter near the lottery machine. My hands were shaking so badly I almost dropped the ticket. I smoothed it out against the plastic counter. I held it under the red laser light. Beep. I waited for the message. "Sorry, not a winner." That's what it would say. That's what my life was now. The screen flashed. "Winner. Claim at lottery headquarters. See clerk." I stared at the screen. It didn't give an amount, just a message that usually meant it was over the limit for a cash payout at the register. The clerk looked up. He must have heard the specific tone of the winner's beep. He leaned over the counter, glancing at the customer display. His eyes went wide. His jaw literally dropped. "Holy..." "Sir?" "What?" I croaked. "That says 10 million, the kid said, his voice cracked. "That's the jackpot. You just won $10 million. I froze. The world stopped. The hum of the refrigerator units faded away. The sound of the rain against the glass vanished. $10 million. It didn't register as money. It didn't register as luxury. It registered as a weapon. $10 million was enough to buy the brownstone back 10 times over. It was enough to hire an army of lawyers. It was enough to bury Richard and Brenda under a mountain of litigation so heavy they would never see the sun again. I felt a surge of adrenaline so potent it nearly knocked me over. I reached for the ticket. But then the fear hit me. It washed over me like a bucket of ice water, extinguishing the fire in an instant. I remembered the court order. I remembered the piece of paper Richard had waved in my face. Ward of the state, legal guardian. If I signed this ticket, if I claimed this money in the name of William Vance, Richard would get the notification. As my legal guardian, he controlled my assets. He controlled my income. He controlled me. If I cashed this ticket, I wouldn't be saving myself. I would be handing my executioner a golden sword. I would be funding my own imprisonment. He would take the money, put me in the cheapest state-run facility he could find, and spend the rest of his life laughing at how his senile father had won the lottery for him. Panic seized me. I felt like a trapped animal. I had the nuclear codes, but I couldn't turn the key. I snatched the ticket off the counter, crumpling it into my fist. "Sir?" the clerk asked. "Sir, you need to sign the back." I didn't answer. I turned and ran. I ran out of the store, back into the freezing rain. I ran until my lungs burned. I huddled in the doorway of a closed dry cleaner 3 blocks away, my heart hammering against my ribs like a trapped bird. I couldn't go to the authorities. They would see my name in the system and call Richard. I couldn't go home. Richard was there. I couldn't check into a hotel. My credit cards were dead. I had a winning ticket worth $10 million in my pocket, and I was still a prisoner of my son's greed. I needed help. I needed an ally. I needed someone who hated Richard as much as I did. Someone who knew the law. Someone who knew where the bodies were buried because she had helped dig the holes. I looked down the street. I saw a payphone, a relic, a miracle. I limped toward it. I picked up the receiver. There was a dial tone. I didn't have any coins. I had given my last dollar to Elias. But I knew how to make a collect call. I prayed she still had a landline. I prayed she would accept the charges. I dialed the number. It rang once, twice, 3 times. "Hello?" The voice was sharp, professional, impatient. "Operator, I have a collect call from William," the automated voice said. "Will you accept the charges?" There was a pause, a long, heavy silence. "Yes," the voice said. The line clicked open. "Sarah?" I whispered. My voice was breaking. I was crying now, the tears hot against my frozen cheeks. "William, is that you? Where are you? Richard told me you were. He said you were in a home." "He lied," I sobbed. "Sarah, don't hang up. Please, it's William." "I'm not hanging up, William. Tell me where you are." I clutched the dirty piece of paper in my hand. I looked at the rain falling on the empty street. "I'm on the street, Sarah. He took everything. But Sarah, I have the ticket." "What ticket?" "I have the nuclear codes," I whispered into the phone, "and I need you to help me launch them." Revenge is not a straight line. It is a meticulously constructed architecture of consequences. And for the first time in days, I wasn't the one being crushed under the weight of the building. I was the architect holding the sledgehammer. Sarah met me an hour later in her office downtown. It was a glass fortress on the 22nd floor, overlooking the city that had chewed me up and spat me out. She didn't hug me when I walked in, dripping wet and smelling of the street. She didn't offer pity, which was good, because pity would have shattered the fragile resolve holding my bones together. She offered me a towel and a glass of scotch, an 18-year-old single malt that tasted like smoke and redemption. That is why I always liked her. She understood that sometimes a man doesn't need a shoulder to cry on. He needs a war room. She reviewed the competency order Richard had filed. She read it with the precision of a surgeon looking for a tumor. "It's sloppy," she said, her eyes narrowing behind her glasses. "He rushed it. He bribed Dr. Evans, clearly.
The medical terminology is vague and repetitive. But he missed a filing deadline for the secondary evaluation. Under state law, an emergency order is temporary. It expires in 72 hours unless a second physician signs off. He doesn't have a second physician yet. We can overturn it, William, she continued, tapping the paper with a manicured nail. But it will take weeks. The courts are slow. And in the meantime, he has access. If we cash this ticket now, in your name, the Lottery Commission alerts the state. The state alerts your guardian. Richard will garnish the winnings before the ink dries on the check. He'll claim you lack the capacity to manage the funds, and he'll put it all into a trust under his control. I took a sip of the scotch. It burned, warming the ice in my chest. Then we don't cash it in my name, I said. We create a blind trust. You claim it as the trustee. I am the beneficiary, but the trust is irrevocable and managed by a third party. Sarah looked at me. A slow, predatory smile spread across her face. And then? She asked. And then, I said, setting the glass down on her desk with a heavy clink, we invite Richard to dinner. We spent the next week building the trap. It was meticulous work.
Sarah fronted me the money for a hotel room, a clean, warm place where I could sleep without fearing for my life. She bought me a suit. Not just any suit, but a replica of the one I had worn to my retirement party 10 years ago. A dark navy wool, tailored to fit the man I used to be, not the husk I had become. We went to the lottery headquarters. We claimed the money. $10 million, safe in an offshore account that Richard couldn't touch with a 10-foot pole, shielded by layers of corporate anonymity. But money wasn't enough. Money buys comfort. Money buys security. It doesn't buy justice. I needed my dignity back. I needed to see the look in his eyes when he realized the game was over. I needed to see him understand that he hadn't just lost a father, he had lost a war he started. On Friday, Sarah sent the invitation. It wasn't a dinner invitation. It was a legal summons to a settlement mediation at her firm. The bait was simple and devastatingly effective. She told them I was broken. She told them I was ready to sign over my remaining pension, the only asset they hadn't been able to seize yet, if they agreed to let me live in the basement of my own home. They took the bait. Vultures always do. They can smell weakness from miles away, but they never smell the trap. The conference room was cold, lit by the harsh fluorescent lights of corporate law. I sat at the head of the long mahogany table. I looked the part of the broken old man. I wore my old tattered coat over my new suit. I let my hands tremble on the table. I hunched my shoulders. I kept my eyes downcast. When the door opened, Richard walked in. He was wearing a suit he had bought with my money, a flashy, ill-fitting thing that screamed new money and no taste. Brenda was with him, clutching a designer bag that probably cost more than the car Elias was sleeping in. "Well, look who crawled out of the gutter," Richard said. He didn't shake my hand. He didn't ask how I was. He sat down at the opposite end of the table, leaning back with an arrogance that made my blood boil. "We thought you froze to death, William," Brenda laughed, checking her phone as if checking the time was more important than the life of a man sitting across from her. "We were about to list the house. The market is hot. We didn't want to wait for the funeral." I swallowed the rage. I kept my voice small, thin, pathetic. "I just want to come home, son," I whispered. "I'll live in the basement. I'll stay out of the way. I'll cook. Just, please, don't leave me on the street. It's cold, Richard. I can't survive another night." Richard scoffed. "The basement is for storage," Brenda snapped. "I need that space for my yoga studio. You can have the shed in the backyard. It has a roof. It's better than a box. But only if you sign the pension over today, right now." I looked at them. I looked at my son. I looked at the woman he married. I looked for a shred of humanity. I looked for a flicker of guilt, a hesitation, a moment where they realized what they were doing. There was nothing, just a black hole of greed where their souls should be. They were monsters, feeding on the carcass of the man who gave them life. "Is that your final offer?" I asked. "It's the only offer," Richard said, sliding a document across the polished wood. "Sign it, old man, or get out. Go back to your cardboard box." I picked up the pen. It was a heavy, expensive fountain pen. I looked at the paper. Transfer of pension rights. I held the pen over the signature line. Richard leaned forward, his eyes hungry, practically salivating at the thought of the money. But I didn't sign. I stabbed the pen into the table. The sound was loud, violent, echoing like a gunshot in the quiet room. The nib snapped, ink bleeding into the wood. "I don't think I will," I said. My voice didn't tremble. It dropped the act. It returned to the deep, resonant baritone of the man who had raised him, the man who had built a life from nothing. "Excuse me?" Richard stood up, confused, aggressive. "What did you say?" "Sarah," I said, not looking away from him. "Play the tape." Sarah pressed a button on her laptop. A recording filled the room. It was clear, high-definition audio. It was from a hidden microphone I had worn taped to my chest during my eviction, a precaution Sarah had insisted on years ago during my estate planning, a precaution I had forgotten until I found the device in my old jacket pocket. The room filled with the sound of Richard's laughter. "He's confused, Dad. You're losing it." Then the sound of the door slamming. Then Brenda's voice, clear as a bell. "I hope he dies quickly so we can sell the watch collection. I don't want to wait for probate. And make sure you transfer the savings before the banks close." Richard's face went pale. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast he looked like a corpse. "This is illegal," he stammered. "You can't record us." "It's admissible in a competency hearing to prove malice and undue influence," Sarah corrected, her voice sharp as a razor. "In this state, only one party needs to consent to a recording. William consented. But that's not the best part, Richard." I stood up. I shrugged off the tattered coat, revealing the pristine suit underneath. I straightened my tie. I wasn't a beggar anymore. I was the patriarch. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a piece of paper. It was a photocopy of a check. I slid it down the table. It stopped right in front of Richard. $10 million, payable to the Phoenix Trust. "You see, Richard," I said, my voice calm, steady, terrifying. "I won the lottery, Tuesday night, after you threw me out." Richard looked at the paper. His eyes bulged. 10 million. "But since you declared me incompetent," I continued, walking slowly toward him, "I couldn't claim it. If I had claimed it in my name, you would have taken it. So the trust claimed it. Sarah is the trustee. I'm your guardian." Richard screamed, reaching for the paper, his hands shaking. "That money is mine! I control your assets! You can't do this!" "No," I said. "The trust stipulates that the funds are to be used solely for the legal defense and housing of William Vance. And the remainder? The remainder is to be donated to the Veterans Housing Coalition upon my death." I leaned in close. I could smell his fear. It smelled like sweat and cheap cologne. "I bought the debt on your house, Richard," I whispered. "The bank sold the mortgage to the trust this morning. You missed 3 payments while you were busy trying to steal my money. You have 30 days to vacate. I'm evicting you." Brenda started sobbing. It was a high, keening sound of pure despair. Richard looked like he was having a stroke. His face turned purple. He lunged at me, his hands reaching for my throat. But he never touched me. Sarah's security guard, a massive man who had been standing silently in the corner, stepped out from the shadows. He caught Richard by the wrist and twisted. Richard fell to his knees with a cry of pain. "You can't do this to your family," Richard wailed, looking up at me from the floor. "We're your blood." I looked down at him.
I felt nothing. No love, no hate, just the cold indifference of a judge passing sentence. I don't have a family, I said, adjusting my cufflinks. I have a lawyer, and I have a friend named Elias. I turned and walked out of the conference room. I didn't look back. I left them screaming at each other, their greed turning into panic, their marriage dissolving in real time as the reality of their poverty set in. That night, I went back to the 7-Eleven. The rain had stopped, but the cold was still bitter. Elias was there, shivering in the same spot, curled up on his cardboard box. He looked smaller than I remembered. I pulled up to the curb in a black town car. The driver opened the door for me. I walked over to Elias. "Elias," I said. He looked up, squinting. He didn't recognize me at first. He saw the suit. He saw the car. He saw a rich man. "Sir?" he croaked. "Get in," I said. He looked at the car. He looked at his filthy clothes. "I can't, sir. I'll dirty the seats." "I bought the car, Elias," I said, extending my hand. "I don't care about the seats." He took my hand. I pulled him up. He was light, frail, starving. "Where are we going?" he asked, fear and hope warring in his eyes. "We have a house to inspect," I said. "It's a brownstone. It has a warm basement, but you aren't sleeping there. I think you're going to like the master bedroom. It's yours." "Yours?" he whispered. "I owed you $1, I said, "and you gave me back my life." We got into the car. As we drove away, leaving the cold, wet street behind, I felt a peace I hadn't known in years. I had lost a son. I had lost the illusion of family. But I had found my humanity. I had found my dignity. And, for the price of $1, that was the best bargain I had ever made.